Well, I have a trick, which is that I call it predicting the present, which is that you take something that already exists that you just read about in the newspaper, and you write about it as though it were being invented in 5 years, and pretend when the newspaper stories become more prevalent that you invented it. So that's one way of doing it. But I think that if you want to extrapolate the effect of networks, the cheap and easy way of doing it is you take any task that today requires big institutions to coordinate a lot of people and requires that a substantial fraction of the effort devoted to the task be devoted merely to coordinating, merely to keeping everyone kind of in sync. And you just assume that that gets free. And then you imagine who would be able to do this if you didn't need an institution behind you to make it happen. And so, I mean, Linux being an interesting example of this. I mean, there are lots of institutions that support Linux. There are some institutions within Linux, like the Free Software Foundation and so on, who would rather I call it GNU Linux. But the actual task of building an operating system used to require a much more formalized institutional structure than it did today. It's probably on the same order of complexity as like building a 70-story skyscraper. So imagine if I said to you, well, I've got this plot of empty land, and I'd like to build a skyscraper. So if you or anyone you know have any like structural steel or like architectural drawings or welding rods or rivets or office furniture or just ideas about how to build the skyscraper, just bring them on down. We'll spend 15 years monkeying with whatever people bring it down, and then after 15 years we'll all move into it. It'll be the greatest skyscraper in the world. You wouldn't get much of a skyscraper. What we've done with networks is we figured out how to take the overheads, the coordination cost associated with these very complicated tasks and make them really low, make them really cheap. And this is like profound, because anything that one person can't do alone, that two or more people are required to do, is literally superhuman, right? It's more than one person can do. It is superhuman. When becoming superhuman gets cheaper, I mean, this is the stuff of comic books. So it's a really cheap and easy way of writing. Science fiction just writes itself. Pick a thing that's complicated and hard and imagine that it's free and write it. You could write a damn good science fiction story about free skyscrapers. That would be really interesting.
I might just.
Sure. I'd read it. Yep.
Are there any of the current generation of dedicated ebook reading devices that you think is worth anything?
Are there any ebook readers that I think are worth anything? I used to really get hung up on gadgets, and partly that was when I guess I had a lot less money, and also it was less frequently true that gadgets would come to you through a subsidy, like with a mobile phone contract. And so I used to think of gadgets as themselves an end. Like I would get this gadget because it would do a thing, and now I think of them as kind of, they're just part of an ongoing process, right? Like, so I can write for you next year's Android or iPhone review, right? Today, Apple or HTC released a new handset that is slightly smaller, runs about 40% faster, and whose battery life is 15% faster. There are about 30% more applications, and it has probably a slightly worse mobile phone contract associated with it, right? So that's the interesting piece of it, right? Because the thing so while the hardware will monotonically get better, and there will be some like step changes, like I think week-long batteries will be game-changing. Tethering was pretty game-changing, but for the most part, it's pretty predictable. I don't get worked up about it anymore, right? Like next year's cameras will be slightly smaller and have a slightly higher pixel count and have slightly faster glass, and we'll have a slightly longer live battery, and we'll have a 64 gig SD card instead of a 32 gig S card. But it's not like that's anything to write home about, because I could write the press release today. In fact, there's probably like a Mad Libs program that churns out press releases for next-gen hardware, right? But the thing that's constant is the ecosystem that accompanies the device. So if you buy an iPhone today, in a year you'll get a new iPhone, but you'll still be although you'll throw away your old iPhone and become e-waste or whatever, the thing that you won't be able to throw away is your mobile phone contract, any proprietary locked-in apps or media that's connected to it. That's kind of immortal, right? So what you can think of, devices, you can think of them as being like mayflies, right? They're here today, they're gone tomorrow. And what they are is they're actually the physical extrusions of a very large kind of cloud, an ecosystem, this nebulous thing that is all of the social and commercial and technical kind of infrastructure that underpins them. And this is long-lived to the point of probably being immortal. And every now and again it extends a tendril into your pocket in the form of a phone. But the thing that you really should be paying attention to is the thing the tendril's attached to, right? This is what H.P. Lovecraft taught us. It's not the tip of the tendril that matters. It's the elder god that's extruding it into our reality. And so, by and large, these ecosystems kind of suck. I mean, I think the Android ecosystem sucks the least, but it's still kind of sucky. I mean, I think on the one hand, it's interesting that Google was able to recall some slightly malicious apps that snuck into their app store. But on the other hand, I kind of think that designing devices that allow remote parties to enforce policy against the owner's wishes and without the owner's knowledge is it's just bad futurism, right? Like I used to, you know those science fiction movies where someone elbows the button on the spaceship that starts the self-destruct count, and there doesn't seem to be an equally easily elbowable button that turns off the self-destruct countdown. And I think, I'm no aerospace engineer, but wouldn't that be a better spaceship if it wasn't designed to explode, right? And every now and again I look at, I marvel at the perfect idiocy of designing devices that are essentially designed to be pwned, right? That are essentially designed to have a mode in which the owner doesn't get to control their actions, and in which they enforce policy that involves accessing, removing, or transmitting information about what's on the device and its owner against the owner's wishes and without their knowledge. I'm like, wow, that would never go wrong. No one will ever misuse that facility. Let's put that one in, And so that element of the ecosystem seems to be irresistible right now in mobile device universe. And so whether it's the Kindle or the iPad, whether it's the iPhone or the Android phone, they all seem to have this lurking in their depths, and it makes me very suspicious of them. No Kindle. Yeah?
I've noticed that a lot of my tech friends who aren't very radical at all are pretty into Boing Boing. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that. Like how you account for its popularity among people who might not seem to be into it.
I'm for it. I guess I'm for it. I guess we historically have drawn politics as a one-axis spectrum, right? That has left wing and right wing, and then sometimes people are a little more sophisticated, might add another axis and put it authoritarian, libertarian, but really it's a very multi-dimensional end space that has lots and lots of different axes, and Boing Boing reflects some of those axes, right? There are elements of it that espouse some values and some that espouse others, and I guess if people find that stuff some stuff interesting and not all of it, that's what the space bar is for. They get to just skip to the next post. It works great for everyone because I don't have to write just what they're hoping to see, and they don't have to read everything I write.
You were talking about this ecosystem of e-waste, and I have this sitting in my lab. I have makers. What do you do? Like in your book, you have people who take all of this waste and they turn it into something new. Mm-hmm. This is fiction. What do you see happening in real life?
So I guess one question I have is why we don't build things to last less long. So one of the problems with devices is that the materials we use in them, I guess because we want to ruggedize them for the pocket, tend to be essentially immortal, right? But the duty cycle of the device is really short. It's like a year or two, and so this is a large part of the e-waste problem. It's not the whole e-waste problem, but a large part of it is that we design devices that are meant to be used for a year, but take 100 million years to degrade, right? So I wonder if we won't someday say, all right, we're actually going to start explicitly designing some devices to gracefully degrade back into the parts stream, gracefully degrade into materials. Bruce Sterling wrote a really interesting kind of manifesto about this for MIT Press called Shaping Things. And he proposed that with the right kind of economic and regulatory framework and the right technology, it might be possible to start readdressing design decisions so that things really do gracefully decompose back into components that can be reused in the next generation of devices, which would be kind of cool. I mean, I think one of the great tragedies of kind of the maker marketplacey things and Etsy and so on is that you often see things like SD cards or memory sticks that have been redesigned by some maker with a great deal of artisanal verve, right? They're beautiful things, and I think, why would you make this beautiful and long lasting if we know we have to throw it out in a year? Because, you know, I mean, what would you do with a 128K memory stick in today's world, right? I mean, it's at a certain point, the use threshold just kind of goes through the floor. So it's a little like when Apple released that 20th anniversary Mac that was designed by Bang & Olufsen and was meant to hang on the wall, and it runs so slowly, right? By today's standards. I mean, it's still a nice O shape, but by like contemporary standards, it's like, you know, nailing a Sputnik control panel to your wall, right? I mean, it has no computational value at all anymore, but it's not quite old enough to be a useful novelty. You know, it's just it's really a kind of crazy white elephant.